In this video, we'll talk about the use of comments in Python. So there's two main ways to make a comment in Python. The first way is to use the pound symbol, or sometimes called the hash symbol. So it's this symbol right there. So for example, let's say we said that x is 1, and we had a little program that said, okay, we want to print x, and then x again. And between each one of them, there is this separator with an exclamation point. So one thing we could do is say, what is the purpose of this particular piece of code? So I might explain why I'm putting this here. So I'd either explain why I'm putting this piece of code here if it's self-explanatory, or if it was overly complex, I would explain what it does. So I might write something like, this code will print the var x 3 times with exclamation point between each var. So what I have is the pound sign and then some text, and Python is going to ignore all the characters on this line. Another way you might use the comment symbol is, let's say you had y equals 2, and then you might explain like just that line really quickly. You'd say, I'm defining y as 2. So the point is that you can either put the hash or pound symbol at the start of the line and then a little explanation, or you can put it at the end of the line and then Python will ignore the rest of that line. Another thing that you might do is that you might comment out some code if you don't want it to run. So rather than using comments to explain something, instead you're going to use the commenting feature just to have Python not run whatever that text is. So let's look at a quick example. Let's say we had a list and that list was 1, 2, and 3. And let's say we had another list and this list consists of the strings A, B, and C. And so let's say we wanted to print X and then we wanted to print Y. So we're printing both of the lists. So we might say to ourselves, you know what? I only want to run this print X here. I don't want to run this print Y. So I'll put a hash or a pound sign before this print Y. And now when we run the code, what will occur is that this print Y will not run. So Python will ignore it. So let's go ahead and run the code. And there we see it. We see that the list A, B, and C is not printed. Now we might want to go back and say, you know what? I actually want, in this case, to print Y, but not print X. We could put the little hash sign before it and run the code. And now we have A, B, and C. So you might use comments to have portions of code not run. And this is useful if you're debugging, something's not quite working. So you might comment out various aspects to try to figure out what is and isn't working. So I mentioned that there are two ways to produce comments. The first one, as we mentioned, is the pound or hash symbol. The second one is to use triple quotes. So Python does not have a way to add multi-line comments. Instead, what people do is, let's say I wanted to have a kind of extended comment. So here would be line 1 of my comment. I might just use a bunch of pound symbols. But another way that people commonly do it is to use the triple quotes. If you put text in between these triple quotation marks, Python's going to read the code, but it's just going to ignore it. Some authors will actually say this is bad practice, but this is another way that's recommended if you need an extended multi-line comment. So let's just look at a quick example. I might say, I really need to go to bed early. And we could even write some code in here, print Y, print X. This is a comment, so Python will ignore this. I stay up all night watching shows. Let's actually try to, in the comment itself, say that this is Y, and then we could try to print Y, and nothing is going to happen here. Python is going to just read this as a string and ignore everything in there. So if we go ahead and run the code, we see we have our list printed from earlier, A, B, and C. Now, the last thing I want to point out is that at least in VS Code, I'm actually going to go back up here and comment this out and comment this out as well. The last thing I want to point out is that in many code editors, there is a very useful shortcut. So let's say we had, print X, and then we had print Y. And we could, of course, go to both of these lines and put a hash before it so we could prevent Python from reading it. But another way that is very handy, especially if you have a lot of lines, is if you just go ahead and select them all and then hit Control or Command if you're on Apple, and then /, and that will comment out all of the lines. And then if you wanted to uncomment them, you would hit Control and then / again, and it would uncomment all of those lines. So this would be helpful if you had a long block of code and you said, I don't want this whole block to run, so I'll comment everything out, and then Python will ignore that huge block of code. So in this video, we looked at the very basics associated with comments in Python.